Hello and welcome to the Alliance Pro Wrestling Network. My name is Louis Carlin, and joining me today for the third time is the host of Pro Wrestling Spotlight. He hosts Matt Memories from MSG, and he's one of the hosts of a new baseball podcast called The Fanagers. He's also the author of this fantastic book, Matt Memories, My Wild Life in Pro Wrestling, Country Music, and with the Mets. Very happy to welcome back to the show John Arezzi. John, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Hey, Lois, how you doing? It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Hey, man, it's always a pleasure to have you on, man. So before we get started, we're going to be talking about Bruno Sammartino versus Pedro Morales, 1972. Before we get started, I get two questions. I want to get your opinions on two things. One, are we going to get a Subway Series this year? The Yankees and Mets are both doing really well. Do you think we're going to get a Subway Series this year?
At this stage of the season, it certainly looks like both teams are going to be definitely heading to the playoffs, even with the expanded system where more teams are in. The Yankees have the best record in baseball.
Yeah.
The Mets have the best record in their division. They're up by 7.5 games as we tape this. So I think there could be a collision in October between the New York teams.
Okay, well, I got my fingers crossed on that. We know who I'm rooting for there.
Absolutely.
Second question, I want to get your opinion on Ric Flair returning to the ring at 73 years old. Well, what are your thoughts on that? I'm just curious about your thoughts.
Like everyone else, you have concerns because of his health issues from the past. I think they're going to play it safe with him. It'll be a 6-man tag.
Yeah.
And the initial main guy that Flair was going to be in the ring with just turned it down, and that was Ricky Steamboat.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a risk to it. I don't think it's a major risk because I don't know. I mean, Flair is at this point of his life, he's kind of a wild card a little bit. He's kind of a bit unpredictable, but he put full faith in his son-in-law, Conrad Thompson, to put this together and to finally get that Ric Flair roast underway at StarCast 5 here in Nashville.
Okay.
But getting in the ring is another thing. It's going to be for nostalgia purposes. And what Conrad told me, this is going to be a true retirement match. He's not going to do it after this. And those were the assurances he wanted from his father-in-law.
Okay, well, I think it's a mistake. I think Ric Flair, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, doesn't need to get back in the ring. But if he wants to get back in the ring, I have my fingers crossed that all turns out okay for Ric Flair.
We all do. We all do.
All right, so let's get into the topic we're going to discuss today. September 30th, 1972, Shea Stadium. Pedro Morales, then the WWWF Heavyweight Champion, defending against Bruno Sammartino. And this was the first of 3 Showdown at Shea mega shows. It was billed as a match of the century. But before we get into that match, let's go back to the beginning, January 18th, 1971. Ivan Koloff shocks the world by defeating Bruno. He wanted a lighter schedule. So what do you remember about when you first found out that Bruno lost the belt to Ivan Koloff? Were you shocked? Were you crushed? What was going through your head?
Little of all the above. I had actually read it in the newspaper the next day. And the Long Island newspaper where I lived was Newsday, and they never did anything on wrestling. Okay. And here I am. I opened the paper up, and there is a 2-page spread on Bruno losing the title at Madison Square Garden the previous night. And I was shocked and saddened because you never thought he dropped the belt. And that was a period of time where I was certainly following the sport, and I was shocked like everybody else was. And it really, what it did for me was kind of pique my interest in what was going to happen next. But Bruno losing it after holding it for 7 years was a big, big shock. And me reading it in a paper that never covered wrestling made it more impactful for me.
I mean, yeah, he was a champion for 8 years up until that point. So it must have been an absolute shock for everybody. What did you think of Ivan Koloff at the time?
Well, I'd known Koloff by watching television as this heel that, certainly looked like he had the capabilities of defeating anybody. And with his mouthpiece, Lou Albano, attached to his side, I mean, he was this big bear, this Russian bear, this guy that was very believable in the ring. Even as a kid, when I was watching at that point in 71, I think I was 14 years old. I was 13 turning 14 that month.
Okay. Okay, I was 2, so I don't. So I kind of envy you that you were able to. You lived through it. You were able to witness this whole thing transpire. But Ivan's title reign was actually short-lived. February 8th, 1971, he lost to Pedro Morales. Did you have any idea, any inkling at all that Pedro Morales was going to be the next babyface champion?
I heard his name. I knew that he even wrestled on the night that Bruno won the title against Buddy Rogers in May of '63. Pedro was, I think, opening match. So I'd always heard his name out there, but I had no inkling that that there would be a title change that quickly. But obviously, you know, getting to know the business years later, it was a transitional champion, and they wanted to put the strap on Morales, and it was probably decided upon months earlier.
So you're a Bruno guy. When Pedro won, were you happy for Pedro, or was it more like Pedro's a champion, but he's not Bruno?
He's not Bruno.
Yeah,
he's Pedro. I mean, there was a total, you know, it was a disconnect. I loved and admired Sammartino, and Morales. I just knew was this fiery Latin brawler with some great aerial moves for the time. But there was not something that was embraced by me, even during most of his championship reign. I was always wanting Bruno to come back.
So why do you think McMahon Sr. went with went with Pedro, I should say, I'm sorry. Do you think Bruno had any say on Pedro becoming the champion?
I don't think Bruno had any say on who was going to become the champion, but Vince McMahon Sr. always went for the ethnic champions. He wanted to draw the audience of ethnic people in the big metropolitan cities, and New York City was certainly one of them. Huge Italian fan base for Bruno and a huge Puerto Rican fan base for Morales. That's what his philosophy was back then, up until the point where he for a long term, you know, he went from you know, after Bruno came back, he, you know, when Bob Backlund won the title after Graham, I mean, that was kind of a different shift for him. But during the 60s and early part of the 70s to the mid 70s, it was all about ethnicity and bringing the minorities in to fill the arenas.
So you were at many Pedro Morales events where he was defending the WWF title. You talk about it on Matt Memories, and was he over with the crowd as Bruno was, or he wasn't quite as over?
He was over big. But it was a different fan base. I mean, it was a Puerto Rican fan base rather than an Italian fan base. I mean, this is where the ethnicity comes in. But yeah, I could say that, you know, I really started going to the matches live right in the middle of the first year of Pedro's reign, and it was explosive. And even when Bruno had come back to win the title in December '73, it was explosive. But the Morales crowds and the Morales fans were more fanatical and more like, we're going to storm the ring if something happens to our guy.
Okay, well, I think that there was.
I was there. I you know, there were fans that were dragged out every single show.
Wow.
Trying to get into the ring or attack the heel. It happened every month.
Wow, so fans actually tried to get into the ring to attack the heel.
I mean, it was crazy. I mean, there were fans that would, you know, they would throw stuff in the ring all the time, but the heels, especially the guys like Blassie and George Steele and some of these really over the top crazy heels, I mean, these fans wanted to get at them. I mean, it happened in Boston when Blackjack Mulligan got stabbed after a match with Morales. I mean, you know, sliced him. So it was crazy.
Do you think that's why they did the title change? Stan Stasiak defeating Morales, not in Madison Square Garden, because they were afraid of a riot?
Absolutely. Okay. Pedro could never lose at the Garden. He only lost once.
Okay.
And that was due to blood. But he would never, you know, there was never a time that he was going to lose by a count out, a DQ. Not like Bruno, because Bruno got counted out a lot. I mean, but Morales, he would not lose. He could not lose in the Garden. Wow. They were fearful of a riot.
Wow. That's
and that
crazy.
would have stopped wrestling in New York.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy, man. So let's talk about the tag team match that led up to Bruno versus Pedro. You lived through it. You watched it all unfold. This match is not available anywhere, unfortunately. I looked for it on YouTube. It's just not available anywhere, unfortunately. Whereas Pedro Morales and Bruno versus Toru Tanaka and Mr. Fuji, Salt got involved. But as you watched it, I'll let you describe what unfolded during that match.
Well, it all took place during a 3-week period of time.
Okay.
And I have some of it on tape, on audio tape. I used to tape it off the TV. But it was during, I guess they used to tape 3 shows in one night in Philadelphia. I mean, like they did for TV back then. And watching TV as a fan, and Vince McMahon, the announcer, announces that Bruno Sammartino was going to be teaming up with Pedro Morales. And it was against a couple of enhancement guys that I can't remember at this point. So that was great. And then he interviewed both of them, and they seemed to really enjoy tagging together. So it was like a 3-week storyline. Second week, same thing. They come back for another victorious match. And then they announce on that second taping, that second match, that the following week, Tanaka and Fuji were to defend their titles against Sammartino Morales.
Wow.
So it was like, holy smokes, and I do have that cassette somewhere. I haven't been able to find it because what transpired in that match, in the third match of the tag team series, was the title match took place. And of course, the heels had their ceremonial salt that they brought into each and every match. And during the heat of the battle, salt was thrown into the eyes of both Morales and Sammartino. During the match, and they couldn't see. They were swinging blindly, and all of a sudden, they were hitting each other. And the storyline, it's like they didn't know they were hitting each other, and that's the way the show ended, with them just beating each other up with punches that they couldn't see who they were hitting.
Yeah, Bruno and Pedro teaming up back then was a huge deal. Huge. It's like The Rock teaming with Steve Austin.
Yeah.
But when they started exchanging blows, were you covering your mouth? Were you shocked? I
was shocked.
Yeah.
I was shocked. I was like, I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe what was happening, and I didn't know what was going to happen after that. I mean, and then I believe because it happened in such a short period of time. The following week, there was an announcement that there was going to be a match between the two of them at Shea Stadium on September 30th, 1972, which, it just, my head exploded. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And so that was a major moment in my memory.
If you could find that audio tape, man, I would be so grateful, man, if you could find that audio tape, man. Why do you think they don't have any more footage of this? This is major. This is a major deal back then. They should have kept the footage.
I mean, there's really nothing from 70, 71, 72. There's nothing out there. When you get to some of the mid 70s, it's there. I don't know if they taped over this stuff. I mean, promoters did that all the time back in that era. It's a shame that the company does not have any footage of any of that.
Yeah, I know. It doesn't make, to me, I would love to see that footage. I really wish they had kept it. So this was Babyface versus Babyface. It was basically non-existent at the time. Was this the first Babyface feud? And I can't think of anything before that.
To my recollection, it was the first, Babyface versus Babyface main event, especially in the caliber of two champions, Sammartino and Morales, being able to work against each other.
So how was that match presented? Because it's normally the formula back then. Babyface has to battle a heel come in, create some heat. The fans would boo him. They would want him to get his comeuppance, and then the Babyface.
There was no buildup. I mean, there was no real buildup. I mean, aside from just interviews that they were talking about, that they couldn't wait to face each other in the ring, and there was no heat. There was no animosity. There was no he did this to me and I'm going to get him back for doing it. There was none of that. It was all about the respect that the individuals had for each other. And it was almost like the reason for the match taking place, which was the brawl in that tag team match, to my memory, wasn't even really addressed during their promos leading up to the Shea Stadium match.
Do you think it would have made sense to turn one of them heel, or were they just both too popular?
Oh, I don't think that would have ever happened. No.
Okay, they were just both too popular. That would have been interesting if like even if it was like heel for like a few weeks, and then after the match they hug and whatever. That might have. But anyway, so how much hype was there leading up to the match? I know you mentioned when Bruno lost, it was a 2-page news spread. Was this covered by?
It wasn't really a big thing for the media, not like WrestleMania would be today. It was not. It was just really promoted heavily on television. I don't remember any big advertising campaign on radio or newspapers. It was just promoted locally, unlike they promoted anything else except for was the match of the century at Shea Stadium. So, which really led to, why there were only 22,000 people at Shea Stadium that night. There wasn't, they could have put it in the Garden.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Only 22,000 people showed up. The Shea Stadium holding 45,000 people. Do you think
55?
55. Do you think that must have been a disappointment for McMahon Sr.?
Well, it had to be, and I think if they were depending on walk up, I bought my tickets the day they went on sale. I mean, and then I was shocked to learn that there were no, because I wanted the best seats ringside, and the Garden ringside was always $7. So going to Ticketron at the time to get those seats, and I was like one of the first online, I believe. There were no seats on the field. There were just, they were field box is what I got. And I was just hugely disappointed because I didn't have press passes at the time. I was still only 14.
Yeah.
So that was a disappointment. But the reason, I mean, if they were depending on a big walk up, I mean, the weather on September 30th, 1972 was dismal.
Okay.
It was cold. It was raining. It was windy. It was just a miserable day. I never forget it. I woke up that day and the clouds in the sky. And I remember going with my friend Frank Favalli, who was the person I went to all my early day wrestling matches with. My dad drove us to Shea Stadium, and we took the train back, I believe. But he was like, "Why are you going to this shit?" I mean, it's like, and it was just a miserable, rainy day. It was horrible.
Yeah, I read it was cold, and it was a cold, rainy night. But how much were tickets, though? By the way, I was just curious. How much are the tickets that you paid for?
I would believe they weren't much more than the Garden. The Garden ringside was $7 at the time, and I think these seats might have been $10, $12 maybe for the best seats.
Wow, that's incredible. $10 to see Bruno against Pedro. Oh, back then it was. But I remember my first show. My dad, the tickets were $8, $6, and $4.
Well, just to give you an example, I mean, the 22,508 that was paid there. I mean, that was a gate of only 140,000. That's all they drew. I mean, that was the live gate, was 140,000.
Yeah, they could have just. Did they have the Felt Forum going on at that time? Did they show matches at the Felt Forum?
No, there was nothing like that. I think their projections for that match, if there was a strong walk up, and if the weather cooperated, if it was a nice night, they were expecting between 35 and 40,000 to be there.
Yeah, that had to be a disappointment. So September 30th arrived. September 30th, 1972. You must have been pumped on your way to Shea Stadium. You must have been absolutely pumped.
I was pumped and I was excited, but I was also looking at the weather, and I'm like, this is not going to be a pleasant experience sitting in the cold and the rain to see this match. And it was highly anticipated what was going to happen. My prediction was Bruno, that's the night he was going to get the title back.
Yeah. And
of course, my dreams were shattered when I found out it was going to be a draw.
Yeah, as we talked about on the last time you were on the show, that was the first time you actually found out that wrestling was a work. It was fixed.
Well, officially.
Yeah. Officially, yeah.
Yeah, that was Professor Elliot Marin was the culprit.
Okay, so tell me, what do you remember about the opening few minutes of the match, and what was the crowd cheering every move for their favorite that was performing?
Yeah, it was a split. It was a split crowd when it came to who was rooting for who. So I wouldn't say there were one guy that had a big advantage fan wise there. But it was because we weren't close up. I mean, even though the ring was stationed, I believe, near second base, or it was still, you were far away. The microphones, I mean, usually in the garden you have those ring mics and you hear every slam.
Yeah.
It was hard to do that during that night, and it was also a lot of rest holds. There was not a lot of action. It was arm drags, it was arm bars, it was kind of a lot of technical scientific wrestling, as they called it back then. There wasn't a lot of brawl. I don't even think a punch was thrown, or if there was maybe one or two in the entire match. So it was very boring.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you, I was going to get into that, but I just wanted to ask you about the 50-50 crowd. I was reading that Bruno was booed when he was coming to the ring. Was he booed walking to the ring, Bruno?
If there were a smitter of boos or scattering of boos, there was nothing that was overabundant. And as far as in my memory of Bruno being booed, like majorly booed. Okay. Maybe some of the Morales fans could have booed him, like some of the I might have booed Morales myself when he walked out because I was a Bruno guy.
Okay, makes sense. So you mentioned the match was boring. At one point, George the Animal Steel runs to the ring. I was reading that he was sent by Vince McMahon Sr. because the match was in fact getting boring. Did that liven the match up at all? George Steele running through? Okay.
Yeah, it did. It popped the crowd. And it was also George was scheduled to be on the show against another heel. I think he was supposed to fight Professor Tanaka in a heel versus heel match. That never took place because the main event was on last and the show ran long and they still had to stop for 11 p.m. curfew. But when George came out, and it was kind of really looked like a shoot, because he tried to run into the ring and all of these security police and cops tackled him and dragged him back into the dugout. But yeah, that was kind of like, oh my God, it's George Steele, and and no one knew why he would want to interfere in that match, except for they saw him and it livened up everybody because it was, was a snoozer.
So did Bruno and Pedro both take turns taking shots at George Steele when he came into the ring? Or did he get to the ring?
He didn't go into the ring. No,
okay,
he was stopped. Okay. He was stopped between, the dugout entrance and the line going, to first base. He didn't even get anywhere close to the ring.
Wow. So the match was really boring then. And what was that, midway through the match, George Steele showed up?
I would say that the Steele thing probably was about 20 to 30 minutes in. Yeah.
Okay. Oh man. Wow. So the match.
I hate to burst the bubble, but believe me, I still am disappointed. All these years later, it's 50 years ago now.
Wow. Yeah. So the match goes 65 minutes, ends in a draw. Now it's some reports say it goes 75 minutes, but I was reading the official time was 65:05. Ends in a draw, and you were obviously disappointed. Was the crowd disappointed as well? Could you hear the disappointment in the crowd?
Everyone felt like we were ripped off.
Okay. All right, man.
There was no definitive finish. I mean, this was the match of the century. How do you end it in a draw?
Do you think Pedro should have won? I know you're a Bruno guy, but to get the Pedro over more, do you think Pedro should have been victorious over Bruno?
Pedro was already over.
Okay.
I mean, he was over, and Bruno was over. So, I mean, they could have given it to someone. They really could have, and I don't know why they even did it. What was the reason for it?
That's a great question. I mean, why do you think they didn't film it though? I know that there was match of the century that they didn't have the cameras rolling for that match.
I think there was. The thing is, I think there was cameras there. They might not have been 4 or 5 multi cameras, but I did notice cameras there, and I believe there is footage of that. If they didn't erase it or throw it away or whatever, some people have said they've seen clips of it.
Like, that's one thing for me. That's the holy grail of matches. I've never seen any. I've seen pictures, and I would do anything to see just like a 30-second clip of that match.
Yeah, it would have been exciting.
It would be. I mean, I'm sure there's some house somewhere in somebody's attic. There's a box of film reels, and on that film reel is the whole match.
It was 3 months. It was 3 months before I started filming at the Garden. So I wish I would have. I wish Christmas would have came early that year.
I know. I mentioned to you in the first time you were on it. I really wish you got that camera before September 30th, 1972.
Yeah, I did take some still shots. I mean, I had an Instamatic camera, and you were so far away, and all of the photos I remember, but they were all underexposed and had they looked green, and it was just they were useless, those pictures.
So, was there ever any talk of a possible rematch or anything, or was it just it was
just like, all right, now they're going to get revenge on Tanaka and Fuji at the next Garden show. I mean, that was the very next week. It was only literally 2 weeks later, on October 16th of 72, that they sold out Madison Square Garden. Or actually, they didn't even sell out the Garden. They only drew 15,000 that night. So they were 6,000 shy of a sellout when Sammartino and Morales beat Tanaka and Fuji 2-0 in the main event of that show at the Garden. So they didn't even draw a sellout. They drew. Maybe people were pissed.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that stems from people being disappointed at the match that they had?
Maybe. It wasn't like the weather had nothing to do with it. It was
indoors. Yeah.
It was October, and it was indoors, and the Garden had done, September 2nd of 72. They did a near sellout at 21,800. And then here you go, the revenge match, Sammartino Morales versus Tanaka Fuji, drawing 15,423.
Wow. So it was just 65, back to the match, 65 minutes of just rest holds. That's all the, wow.
No action, no brawl, nothing to get the crowd excited and popped and out of their seats.
Yeah. So there was
it was a huge disappointment. It was so exciting to anticipate what was going to happen. And then standing in line when I was told it was going to be a draw, that kind of burst my bubble. But watching it, I think it could have been positioned more where they were like brawling towards the end and fighting and, pounding on each other as there were seconds left before curfew. But that really never happened. There were bear hugs and,
wow, man.
I don't even remember Morales doing a signature dive off the top rope during that match. I do remember Bruno having Morales in bear hugs 2 or 3 times during it. That lasted 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay. Wow, man.
No ref bumps, nothing like that. There was nothing to keep exciting.
That's what I thought. I thought, there was some wrestles, but I thought that they, towards the end, it would have got like real hot and heavy, but I guess I was wrong then.
Not to my memory. I was just pissed.
Yeah, no, I would imagine I would have been pissed too. If you were booking the match, how would you have ended the match? How would you, what would have been the result if you booked it?
I would have had Bruno beating Morales in a backbreaker.
Okay. I personally would have put Pedro over at the time because he was a champion. That's what I would have.
He was a champion, right? It would have solidified a very historic, and it would have solidified his place as the guy that beat Bruno Sammartino in a title match, and Bruno couldn't get the title back. That would have been good booking. I wouldn't argue against it, but my preference would have been to Bruno win the match because I was a Bruno guy back then. But yeah, I could agree with your.
But I would have had Pedro hold
booking.
I would have had Pedro hold the trunks and cheat to win and turn heel. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
No, why kidding? I mean, that would have been that would have been better booking than what they did.
Anyway, looks like we're running out of time here on Zoom. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today again, John. And if I have other matches to discuss, could we do this again in the future?
Absolutely. I'm not going anywhere.
All right. Awesome, man. So again, thank you so much for joining me again today. Been an absolute pleasure. And until next time, man. And you've lost a lot of weight, by the way, and you posted a picture. So congratulations. You look absolutely fantastic, man.
I feel good. I walk every day, and
that's good.
So I'm happy.
You're my inspiration. I need to lose some weight too. So you're my inspiration on that, man. So okay, again, thank you so much. Until next time, man. Have a great rest of the weekend.
All right, take care.
Take care. Bye bye.